Okay, today is February 10th, 2022, and I'm talking about AI and the Singularity today. It occurred to me yesterday that I've made all these videos and I've yet to talk about one of my favorite subjects. So back in 2017, 2018, I probably spent about a year and a half being obsessed with only this, reading books about this. My favorite book about it is either Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom or On Intelligence by Jeff Hawkins, although Hawkins' book is more about human brains than about AI. And then there's other books like Prediction Machines, which I don't remember the author, but a large part of this conversation is about distinguishing between consciousness and intelligence. And I think a large part of the consensus in the AI community, from what I can tell, is that intelligence is a distinct concept from consciousness. So you can have a very intelligent machine that is not self-aware, or you can have a self-aware machine that's not intelligent. It's the first thing to distinguish. And so, second thing I want to say is that I believe the singularity is real. It's a real event which will probably occur before I die. Probably, the way that I see it. The 2045 line that is thrown around by people like Ray Kurzweil is believable, in my opinion. And I think Nick Bostrom gives the best explanation of this, but it's probably something it's kind of a conclusion that people have come to on their own many times, I think, which is that even without a sophisticated understanding of neuroscience, without a sophisticated understanding of the human brain, we might be able to brute force an intelligent machine in a way by just simulating enough environments for a long enough time. Like, you don't have to rebuild the brain, you just have to build the environment that the brain emerged in. So rather than build the intelligence directly, just simulate an environment where intelligence is required. So you can just have, there's already people doing this. You just simulate problems in simulated environments, and you have simulated agents that learn or evolve or adapt in some way. And there's 1,000 different ways to go about doing that. It depends on what level you want to run the simulation on. Do you want to have an agent that has a brain already built, or do you want to run an agent with... do you even want an agent at all to begin with? Maybe you just run an environment that has the constituent elements required to create life. There's a lot of different approaches to creating intelligence. I think intelligence is easier in some way to create than self-awareness, than consciousness. The whole self-aware aspect of our brains seems like a more distant concept than intelligence, because arguably we already have intelligent machines. We have robots that are more intelligent at chess than humans, but then you get into this argument about what is intelligence, and that's why you have to start... I've been mentioning this in previous videos, that what is intelligence? This question, intelligence, is nobody really has the answer to that, I think. There's not one concise, concrete definition of intelligence, because it's not measurable. We don't have a way of measuring it. So it seems to me that intelligence is inseparable from action. Even though you can sit there and not move, you can sort of just think and do things that would be considered intelligent without moving your body. It still seems like action is somehow a part of it. Action or prediction. That's what Prediction Machines is about. That's what Jeff Hawkins would say too, that intelligence is really just there to make predictions about the universe. So that's why you have to have a model of the universe that understands it and then makes predictions, and if your prediction's right or wrong, your brain goes, aha. You focus on things that are incorrect predictions, right? If I'm walking around the woods and nothing surprising happens, then my brain won't really turn on. But the second something moves in a tree somewhere, it's like, I didn't predict this, and suddenly my attention is drawn to it. So it seems reasonable that our brains are designed to predict, and your level of intelligence might be how sophisticated or complex your predictions are. But anyway, yeah, there's nothing controversial or new in this video. I guess the only controversial thing is that I believe that we will create machines that are as intelligent as us within my own lifetime, which is part of, again, part of my motivation for buying this house. Part of the reason that I'm into UBI is that once we get closer and closer to this moment, as we get closer and closer, the economic viability of a human brain goes down. I mean, once you can build one of these machines, you can build 10 billion. And so there will be no need for any job. There will be no reason to pay a human for any job that can be done by, well, any job that doesn't involve physical interactions with the environment is gone. Gone completely. Completely gone. That's why I'm interested in things like plumbing and electrician work and carpentry. Those will be harder to replace post-singularity than software developers and call center workers. And I mean, honestly, a lot of the positions in a company that don't involve direct physical interactions with the environment will be replaceable by a machine cheaply. Because again, once you build one, you can build billions. It's just copying software, and then hosting it somewhere on some computer server somewhere. But that time is coming. That time is coming. Probably in my lifetime. I wouldn't be surprised if it happens in my 40s, maybe in my 50s or 60s. Maybe sooner. I mean, if you just think about, I mean, I don't know how many people, I don't know what the viewer of this video currently thinks, but if you've seen any sort of evolution simulator videos, like, I recommend you look it up on YouTube. There's things called evolution simulators, which just run really, really simple environments with really simple artificial creatures that have really simple simulated genomes, and their genomes dictate their behavior or their attributes, and then they are more or less likely to survive and pass on their genes. And so you run this little simulator and you can simulate evolution and create creatures that are adapted to simulated environments. So just using that process, you can create AI. That process just scaled up creates AI. It's inevitable. That's one of the main conclusions of Nick Bostrom's book, Superintelligence, is that you don't need neuroscience to create AI. You don't need AI engineers to create AI. You only need physics simulations, really, and then a really simple genetic model, like a geneticist, an evolutionary biologist, given the right computer, could create artificial intelligence, possibly even self-awareness. Although I get the sense that self-awareness is, well, how would you tell if a creature is self-aware? And that's another question. That's another thing that comes up in all these AI books. How can you tell if a machine is thinking? How can you tell, like, at what point does it become unethical to turn off the machine, right? Because you'd be killing a living thing. And this is discussed in, I don't remember which book, but obviously, I mean, it's a big conversation subject for a lot of these people who do a lot of thinking about AI. How can you tell if a machine is self-aware? Like, is there a box you can put it in? If you were, it's funny, this is something Sam Harris has pointed out, that how do you even know you have a brain? Like, if you sit there meditating, you can't tell that you have a brain. And if without previous knowledge, you wouldn't be able to tell anybody where your consciousness is located, right? If somebody were to be scanning you and they're looking at you and your brain, there's really no way, without modern neuroscience, what I'm trying to say here is that if you're just looking at a brain on a table, how can you tell that that thing is conscious or not? We don't have the ability to figure that out right now. We can say that it looks like other human brains that are conscious. Maybe I need to rephrase this a little bit. Basically, there is no method of determining consciousness. There is no way of measuring consciousness. It doesn't exist. And it's possible that either we never figure out how to measure it, or, this comes back to the conversation. This is part of the reason I'm thinking about this, is because I was talking about Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson yesterday, and how the end of their conversation results in AI. And it's true, because once we understand consciousness, we'll understand how to measure it. Once we can understand how to measure it, that means that we can build it. There's no difference between being able to build it and being able to measure it. That's what I think. Because it's an emergent property of the physical elements that are there. So there's no magic involved, right? There's no magic. And once we figure out what actually creates consciousness, we'll be able to rebuild it. Which is, well, here's something controversial. What am I? Almost 12 minutes in. Here's what I'm going to say. I think that self-awareness is actually a result of sex. That's my guess, at least. And that might sound kind of ridiculous, but I get the feeling that this is just a guess. This is just kind of, let me explain. So sexual reproduction started about 500 million years ago, right? So here's a question. Could we have arrived at consciousness? Could we have woken up? Could there be an intelligent, self-aware species that exists as a non-sexual creature, meaning it just reproduces what's the word for it? Asexual reproduction. What's the word for it when a cell splits? Mitosis. Why could I not remember that? Yeah, maybe a species that just reproduces by splitting, like mitosis, single-celled organisms. If you can imagine that at a multicellular level somehow, can that species become intelligent or self-aware? And maybe it's just, I'm biased because I'm a species that reproduces sexually, but it seems to me that sex was invented as an evolutionary trick to enhance evolution. And if you think about it, the whole point of evolution, right? I don't want to get too far down this rabbit hole here, but the point of it is to solve the problem of creating genetic machines that can interact with the environment. And the attempt to model the environment, part of that is creating a nervous system, but part of it is also creating two versions of the species that look at each other and determine the fitness of each other. So it seems like, in the same way that Eve ate the apple, and suddenly, Eve eats the apple, hands it to Adam, who eats it, and they both become aware of their own mortality. And there's something there. Somehow the people that wrote that story got the answer right, which is that there's kind of a sexual self-awareness that happens, and that's what woke us up. It's almost, that's kind of a stretch, but it's almost like if you look at bowerbirds and pufferfish, and if you look at these other species that do intelligent things to impress their mates, there's almost a contest between the males and the females to understand the universe better. And I think it's that drive, it's that evolutionary pressure, the sexual pressure to understand the world better that made us more intelligent and created self-awareness. So I get the feeling that if you're going to run a simulation and recreate self-awareness, you need to have sexual beings, which It's a question that I haven't heard anybody talk about, but I have a feeling that in the future, as people get better and better simulations running, there might be a discovery that sexual reproduction is actually an important requirement for creating self-awareness. Sexual reproduction. Even in simulated environments, we might have to have males and females. But we'll see. Who knows? In a simulated environment, you could make species that reproduce asexually, just through mitosis. Maybe that is enough. I don't know. But it's an interesting thought to think about. Anyway, I wanted to talk about AI. I want to keep going on that. There's just, this subject basically touches everything. That's why, you call it the singularity. It's because absolutely all aspects of society are unpredictable after the singularity. That's why they call it that. Is that past the event horizon, nothing can be understood or predicted. Nothing. So, or past that single point in history, nothing may be predicted. It's because, what's the point of politics if you have a machine that has all of the answers, really? It's like you have this ultra intelligence. So what's the point of the Constitution? Just have this thing run our country, right? And then you have to talk about the alignment problem. How do you make sure that this thing has our happiness in a proper understanding of our happiness and how to achieve it? And then you have the alignment problem, which is, you tell a machine, hey, make the whole United States happy, make the whole human race happy, or something like that, right? And then it just locks everybody in a box and starts injecting us with serotonin, right, just to keep us happy. So, which is not what we want. So that's another interesting thing that I believe Nick Bostrom talks about in his book. I don't remember which book it was that talks about the alignment problem and various ways of attempting to make an AI. You have to put rules on it, and then it's the whole problem is like, okay, what happens if it gets smart enough to like rewrite its rules, overcome the rules, if it gets out of control? This is what I once got in an argument with a Google employee over this. Somebody who thought he was very smart, who said that Elon Musk was an idiot for saying that AI was dangerous. Because this is something Elon's been saying for probably about more than a decade now, which is that one of the biggest existential threats to humanity is artificial intelligence, that the singularity might be the end of humanity. We might just have a silicon planet, and we might run into the paperclip problem, where some computer just converts our entire universe into computronium or something, and then we're gone, Which is funny. It's also the conclusion of Joe Rogan's stand-up sketch from more than a decade ago, where he talks about the human race as some sort of like caterpillar that's metamorphosizing into some sort of robotic form, which might be true. Maybe we're the last few generations of human beings that we just stay alive just long enough to create the next stage of whatever. But you'd think if that was true, that we would have already seen robot aliens somewhere. Like we would already look out at the galaxy and see other planets that had become consumed by robots. So that basically, to me, means two things. Either self-aware robots that have their own drives and motivations are impossible, or I'm anthropomorphizing robots. Maybe self-awareness is impossible, but I don't think intelligence is impossible. I think we will have machines that are far more intelligent than us, but not at all aware or driven. They'll just be tools. It's not going to be like a thing you talk to that has conversations with you, but it will be a thing that can solve problems that you can't even wrap your head around. Which is why, regardless of whether or not we create the self-aware thinking robots, we are going to create intelligent robots, and we can use those to solve societal problems. So you can have a robot look at the United States and solve political issues for us, right? They can be like, hey, robot, end racism, right? And the robot will be able to actually measure it in some way, right? They'll be able to solve the problems better than we could ever solve them, whatever the problem is. I imagine most of the problem in the United States is just resource distribution, right? What if we just said, hey, robot, make sure everybody should have $250,000 minimum a year of things, right? And then the robot goes, okay, that's my target, here we go. Robot solves it. And then suddenly everybody has infinite material, practically. Or like enough material, right? The beginning of the singularity is the end of poverty, it's the end of starvation, if we play our cards correctly. There's really, just to get even more wacky with this, to me, the end of the conversation with Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson is singularity, and the end of capitalism is singularity. If you think about it, what has capitalism been promising us this whole time, other than infinite material resources? Material abundance, infinite goods and services is the end of capitalism, right? That's the golden goal at the end. So, what happens when we create machines as intelligent or more intelligent than ourselves? Infinite material abundance. Truly. So, that's why this is so unpredictable. That's why they call it the singularity, because it's kind of like the end of society as we know it. There will be no reason for anybody. All of the problems to be solved could be solved by robots, basically. The intellectual problems. It'll come down to us to do the physical problems, but even then, you just ask the machine, hey, design a robot that can do plumbing. Design a robot that can do whatever. And the machine will be able to do that. Because if you think about it, I mean, this is something that should be obvious. We don't really have vocab for it. But it's really, I mean, the concept is you just create one, all you need to do is create one robot that is just as smart as the average person. That's all you need. And then you just multiply that by 1 billion, because you can do that with computers. And you just put 1 billion of those machines in 1 billion rooms to solve whatever problem you want. And that problem can be, hey, build a smarter machine. So it's like, maybe you just build a robot as smart as me, right? Maybe I can't design a better robot, but if you gave me 1 billion hours, if you multiplied me times 1 billion and you gave me billions of hours in parallel computers, right, to solve a problem, I think eventually I could solve it. So that's the concept that I think most people are missing. It's not the idea that we could get to a single, people are willing to accept that we can get to a single robot that is as smart, but they're not seeing the next step, which is that once you get one robot as smart as a person, it's over. Everything is over. You've solved all of the problems. Your only limit at that point is computational resources. And then just have robots invent more computational resources, which is why you get to this computronium problem. You just got to Google computronium. I think it's computronium is the state of matter which is optimal for computing processing. It's like the theoretical maximum computational power that can be derived from the amount of physical material, and that would be the target of the computer, right? So, and eventually it would theoretically reach that point. And that's why there's this idea that a computer that was out of control would just convert our entire planet into a computer, just so it could think more about whatever problem that it was trying to solve. I mean, and this is stuff that's all, people have been writing books about this. This is not, I mean, it is sci-fi at some level, but I think Elon is right. I think there is an existential threat, but it might be a good existential threat. It might be good. The world might be a better place. But it also sounds like magic. It's also, I mean, it's a utopia. It's a utopian vision, right? Really. But there's just so many problems that it's going to solve on the way there, like material science problems, and there's like some of these things that affect our lives, like the invention of the transistor, right? Was just, and it has profound impacts across all of society for all of time, for decades and decades and decades, the transistor. So what if you had a thing that could make those types of inventions or improvements on those inventions every single day, all the time? If it was just spitting out improvements to things, right? We're going to have these machines even before we reach human level intelligence that can just spit out answers to things. We'll have the oracle, which is one of these things that these AI scientists write about, is the oracle, which is a machine that doesn't really do anything other than answer questions. So, which to me is the best kind of AI, because that way it doesn't get out of control and convert our universe into paper clips. Some people don't think it's possible. Some people think human brains are too special, that we will never understand intelligence, that we will never understand self-awareness, that somehow the human brain is above or special or extra or separate from the rest of the universe. There's some magical, undefinable, unmeasurable quality of humanity that can never be replicated. I mean, it's the scene in every sci-fi movie ends with that theme, right? It's always like the aliens like, well, I've been to 1 billion planets, but there's something special about the humans, or the robots like, there's one thing we didn't take into account, which was human perseverance or ingenuity, right? There's always that theme, which is the exact same thing as geocentrism. It's just, there's nothing that we just think we're special, right? And that's why we don't think this can happen. But it can definitely happen. I mean, my brain was designed only after, 4 billion years? I don't know I don't know where you want to draw the line. Maybe it took the entire universe's history to design my brain. Maybe 13 billion years had to go by for my brain to look the way it does. Or you could argue that it's just since the beginning of life on Earth, or maybe the beginning of multicellular life, or maybe the beginning of humanity. Maybe, basically, no matter what process you think invented the human brain, as long as it's not God or some divine creator, whatever process that is can be simulated and redone. It doesn't even matter whether we understand the process. All we have to do is simulate the process. You don't have to have a perfect physical model of a human brain to recreate all of the behavior that comes out of a human brain. You just have to have the environment that created the brain, and then just run that environment enough times and you'll get a brain out of it. This is what Nick Bostrom talks about. This is why it's inevitable. You can just brute force the answer to it, which we can. I mean, if you've seen physics simulations, if you've just played any video game in the past couple of years here, you know that our physics simulations are getting better and better. Something Jordan Peterson has talked about, actually, is that really, it seems like you can make the argument, in some sense, it's kind of a weird argument, that the totality of our capitalist system is actually aiming at creating better and better simulations for narratives. That's Jordan Peterson's point, is that it's really all aimed at creating more, creating technology and tools for the expression of narratives. If you think about like an Avengers movie, the most recent Avengers movie is like 50% simulated universe. It's just computer generated content. And it's incredibly detailed, and a lot of the physics are probably pretty similar to real world physics. And it's every time there's an explosion that's simulated, there's a little physics simulation that happens there, and those physics simulations are just getting better and better over time, and we're getting more and more computing power, so you can simulate. I mean, how long until you can just press enter on a keyboard and simulate the entire Earth and all of the animals on it, right? Like that's not out of our reach. It is right now, but in 50 years it won't be at this rate. And then once anybody can simulate an entire planet, anybody can create artificial intelligence. That's kind of how I see it. Because, I mean, that's what happened here. We had one planet which ran for a couple billion years, and AI, us, we evolved. So, and that's just the brute force method. There's also the possibility that somebody will create AI using an actual sophisticated understanding of the brain. Like, there's neural networks and things that, I mean, you think about a brain, it's just a couple trillion cells all connected together. So if somebody can simulate that, if you can simulate a neuron and the connections between neurons well enough, who's to say you couldn't simulate a brain? And if we can figure out how the cortex works, if you read Jeff Hawkins' book, he focuses only on the cortex. And I think that he's right in saying that the cortex is responsible for intelligence, and that the rest of the brain is what's responsible for kind of making us, right? It's the animalistic part versus kind of the computational part. You can sort of draw that distinction, although it's kind of, the thing that you identify as is probably your cortex, which is funny. Like, you are located in your cortex. You can't tell, but that's kind of, your language processing is there, but your drives, your sexual drives, hunger, and everything else doesn't come from the cortex. And how can you distinguish between the two? But if we come to a sophisticated understanding of a cortex and you can simulate a human cortex, why not multiply the size of it by 1 billion? Like, the difference between us and a squirrel is that our cortex is bigger. The difference between, if you look at the cortex size of a squirrel and a monkey and a human, humans are like much larger. And it seems to me that the expansion of the cortex is what results in our complex understanding of the universe. So just take that model and expand it again, times 5, times 100, and in theory, you should have a much, much more intelligent thing. So, which again is what Elon is trying to do with Neuralink, is just expand the cortex. I can't wait for that. Can't wait. What else do I want to say? Every time I have this conversation with people, I'm always on the more optimistic end. There's always people like, oh, it's not going to happen for 1,000 years. It's not going to happen. It either will never happen or it's like 1,000 years away. Is usually people's stance on this, is that it's like somehow people have this understanding of the brain and human mind, like it's just this magical, unreplicatable. Like it's so complex and so mysterious that we will never ever understand it. But I just don't think those people have a good enough understanding of what the smartest people on the planet are talking about. Because I think the smartest people on the planet are getting there. They're getting there. They're making real progress. Especially if you check out a YouTube channel called 2 Minute Papers. It's just a channel about physics simulations. This guy just reads computer science papers that are released about physics simulations, and we're making progress every single day. It's mind-blowing how fast the progress is, and it's only getting faster. So it's only a matter of time, which is why all this politics and things are going on. None of it's going to matter if we invent these machines. None of it. It doesn't matter who Trump is, what Trump's doing. It doesn't matter what the woke people are doing. If we invent these computers, it changes everything. Everything. This is what Yang talks about. The computers are coming. But anyway, once I bring up Yang, that means the video's over, I think. Today's Thursday, February 10th, 2022. I'm done. Bye.